Hi, I'm Rebecca Kemp Brent. I'm lucky enough to get to travel from time to time, and I have found that these packing cases really do make a difference. It's easier to get my things organized in my suitcase, and it prevents that odd moment when you open your suitcase and everything falls out. You can buy these, but it's so much more fun to make your own, and then you have your choice of any color, print, and size that you'd like to make. On our website, there'll be a complete pattern for this to make a packing case exactly this size and shape, but as you can see, you can change that up and make it any size, shape that you want for whatever you need to carry around. Yeah, I've used a little bit of mesh in the centers of my packing cases. It's nice to be able to see what's inside, and the mesh is not too hard to find right now at fabric stores, or you can check, especially for colored mesh, at quilt shops and retailers that sell supplies for making bags. If all else fails, you can always go to the dollar store and pick up one of these inexpensive mesh laundry bags and use that as the raw materials. I'm using a particular kind of seam in these bags because unlike most of the bags we make where the structure is important and we need to be sure that it holds its shape, my priority this time is making sure that this is something lightweight that doesn't add any bulk to what I'm already packing. So in your pattern, you will have a template for curving the corners, and the template and the dimensions that you're given include a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all of the pieces, and on some of the pieces you have an extra 1/2 inch of seam allowance added. That may not make any sense right now, but when I show you how this all goes together, you'll understand. And what that gives us is beautifully finished seams on the inside of our bag. You could also serge this or you could bind it, but this is a technique that might come in handy for you from time to time, even on other projects. So come with me to the machine and let me show you a few of the more complex things that go into putting one of these cases together. Okay, the first thing I want to talk with you about is putting in the zippers, and I like to use these polyester coil zippers because it gives you so much flexibility with color and with length. And to make sure that we can get the zipper we need that's long enough for the bigger packing cases, I've actually used 2 zippers in most of my cases. With a really good all-purpose thread, this is going to be sturdy and also give you a nice look to your finished project. So to use the 2 different zippers, I just place them so that they meet at the center front. I leave about a 1/4 inch gap between the 2 and stitch them in place. You can see from the wrong side that I've sort of folded that zipper tape, the ends of it, to the wrong side so that it's out of the way and won't show from the exterior. Then sewing the zippers on is a simple matter of putting the zipper right side together with your bag fabric. This is the side panel. And you stitch about a 1/4 inch from the edge of your zipper tape. What I usually do is leave my all-purpose foot in place, move the needle to the far right position, and then I can use the zipper teeth as a guide to make sure that my seam stays nice and straight. Then we flip the zipper out away from the fabric, and we top stitch, which you can see pretty easily from the back here, and that covers the raw edge of the seam allowance with the zipper tape. Then we have the extra length of the zipper to take care of. Easy as pie. One good thing that you have to remember is you want your zipper to be closed when you do this so you don't cut off the pull of the zipper. And then just take a few stitches back and forth across your zipper tape and the teeth just inside the edge of your fabric. And once you've done that, you're ready to cut this off. And you have a custom-sized zipper just for your project. Now comes the sort of magic of this project. I'm going to show you how to make what I call a wrapped seam finish. And you could use a binding, but I like to do this because it doesn't really add any extra fabric. I mentioned earlier that there's an extra seam allowance on some of our pieces. In this case, it's this handle assembly that has the extra seam allowance on the ends. And that's because we're going to use that to wrap our seam allowances and make the neat finish. The first thing we do is begin by sewing with the wrong sides of our fabric together. At the sewing machine, I'm going to use a scant 1/4 inch for this project, and the reason is that when we wrap the seam allowance, we're going to take up a little extra fabric in the wrapping. So I'm going to bump my width 1/2 millimeter or 1 millimeter to the right, and that's going to make my seam allowance a little bit less than that 1/4 inch. Then we're ready to put this under the presser foot and sew. And remember, this is with wrong sides together. Now you'll notice that I did not use my automatic scissor. You'll see why in just a minute. I'm going to go over to my iron and just give this a quick press. And I'm pressing the seam allowances toward that handle assembly. The easy way to remember this is that you don't ever want to press the seam allowances towards something as bulky as the zipper. Once that's done, then I'm going to wrap my seam allowances by folding that handle assembly back on top of the side. If you look at it from this side, it's easier to see. And all I have to do now is just stitch in the ditch. The way this differs from a French seam is that with a French seam, I would be folding right on the seam line, but in this case, I'm folding at the raw edges instead, and then I'm doing the stitch in the ditch at the seam line. And there's my nice, neatly finished seam, easy peasy. With this particular project, where I've rounded the corners, and you can see here, this is an assembled top and this is the bottom piece, but I'm going to demonstrate on just a smaller piece so that I can show you this part of the technique, because we're also going to use this wrap technique on a curve, which is something where French seams aren't appropriate. So this is, even in garment sewing, you might find this wrapped seam to be something useful. The first thing that I need to do is to run a gathering stitch on my scant 1/4 inch line. And to do this, this is why I should have left that long seam. See, I remembered once, but not the second time. So what I'm going to do is just real quickly pull up my bobbin thread. So that I can hold on to my thread tails. And then most of the time in sewing instructions, it will direct you to set your machine for a really long stitch length when you're doing gathering stitches, but I prefer just to go up a little bit bigger. So I'm actually going to just go to a 3 millimeter stitch, hold on to those thread tails, and sew the scant 1/4 inch from my edge for about 2 inches on each side of my curve. And that's going to let me pull up the threads so that I can gather these corners. And I have my sample already pinned together for you. You may be able to see that I have little marks, and the directions will tell you exactly where to place those marks, but these are so that we can match everything up and it comes out perfectly. Once again, we're going to start with the wrong sides together, and where I go around my curve, I've pulled up my gathering thread so that I have just a little bit of gather here along the seam. And I'm going to go back to the machine and stitch that seam. Be sure you remember to set your stitch length back to the regular stitch length. And pull out your pins before you come to them so that you can avoid stitching over a pin and possibly breaking or bending a needle. Now there should not be a lot of gathers. The template that comes with the instructions takes about 3/4 inch off these curved edges, so there's not a whole lot that needs to be gathered back in. And you would just continue all the way around your pouch if this were more than just a sample. Okay, so I've got my stitches with the gathers in place, and now once again I'm going to wrap. This time it's the bottom or the top piece, and I'm going to wrap it around my seam. Just use your fingers and a little bit of fiddling, it shouldn't take too much, so that you get that spread out into a nice 1/4 inch, and you're ready to go back to your machine and stitch in the ditch. And if I were doing this at home, I'd probably take the time to pin this. I'm not one for doing a whole lot of basting, but sometimes, like this, it's a good idea to do the basting. And I'm going to reset my stitch so that it's right in the middle of my presser foot, because that gives me the best visibility for this stitch in the ditch. Get everything situated, and when you're sewing around a curve, just remember that you can stop and lift the presser foot and pivot every couple of stitches if you need to keep everything nice and straight, well, not straight, but a nice even curve without any pokes or jags in it. One reason that I've curved the corners on this is not just for the aesthetics of it, it looks good, but also because if you have curved corners, then you don't have those little square corners where bits and pieces can get tucked in and make sort of a holder, a catch-all for the little bits. Then you turn this right side out and you have your nice stitched seam. If you have a couple of the gathering threads that show, you can just pull those out or you can clip them. And that puts your bag together. Once you have the seam sewn, it's all finished and ready to take on a trip. So then you have this beautiful seam from the outside of your bag, which is also neatly finished on the inside. Let me show you that on the finished bag over here. When you unzip it and open it up, it's all beautifully finished with no raw edges. So I hope that you have some pleasant travel in your future. You'll be ready to go. Maybe at least a nice trip to the fabric store to pick out some lovely fabrics to make your own packing cases.